One of the fastest ways to create conflict in a family business is to divide everything equally and assume the problem has been solved. It sounds fair, it sounds reasonable, and in some cases, it might even work for you. But when it comes to succession planning, fair and equal are not always the same thing. In fact, some of the most difficult family business disputes begin with parents trying to do what they believe is fair. The problem is fairness can mean very different things to different people. And if those expectations are never discussed ahead of time, the consequences can last for years. Welcome back to Legacy, the Business Succession Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jared Pullen. Today, we're talking about one of the most emotionally challenging aspects of business succession planning, and that is family transfers. More specifically, we're going to look at how business owners can balance fairness and control when family members are involved in the succession plan. Because while transferring a business to the next generation may sound straightforward, the reality is often much more complicated. Different children have different interests. They have different levels of involvement in the business. They almost certainly have different capabilities. And sometimes these kids have very different expectations. If you've never wondered why or how to treat a family member fairly without putting the future of your business at risk, this episode is definitely for you. So let's get at it. When business owners begin discussing succession planning with their families, one of the first questions that often arises is ownership. Who's going to own this business? How much are they going to own? For many parents, the instinctive answer is quite simple. We'll simply split everything equally. After all, they love their children equally. They want to treat them equally, and they want to avoid any conflict in regard to that succession plan. The challenge is that equal ownership does not always create a fair outcome for everyone. Let me give you an example to illustrate. Imagine a successful manufacturing company owned by a husband and wife. They have two children. One child has worked in the business for about 15 years. They understand the operations, they manage the employees, they have relationships with both customer and suppliers. They are readily involved. The other child has built a completely separate career and has never been involved in the business. As retirement approaches, the parents decide to transfer the ownership equally between both children. Right down the middle, 50-50 each. At first, everyone seems satisfied. The arrangement seems fair, but after several years progress, challenges begin to emerge. The child running the business is working 60-hour work weeks. He's managing the staff, making all the difficult decisions, and assuming all of the operational risk inherent with running that business. Meanwhile, the passive shareholder expects an equal economic benefit because, well, they own half the company. Neither child is necessarily wrong, but their expectation of the circumstances are very much different. And the ownership structure does not account for those differences. The issue wasn't the parents and their lack of love. It wasn't the lack of fairness in it. The issue was assuming that equal ownership would automatically solve a much more complicated family dynamic. This is one of the most common succession planning challenges that family businesses will face. Fairness and equality are not always the same thing. And recognizing that distinction early can prevent significant conflict later on. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean equal ownership is a bad idea. In some families, this works extremely well. But successful family transfers usually require business owners to ask a more important question. What outcome are we actually trying to achieve here? Are we trying to create equal ownership? Is there equal economic benefit amongst the kids? And is there equal opportunity? Or We're just trying to create the best possible future for the business itself. These objectives are not always aligned, and understanding the difference is absolutely critical. Let me give you another example. Imagine a business owner with 3 children. One works in the company, one has absolutely no interest in the company, and one is interested but lacks the experience required to lead the organization. Again, the owner decides to transfer ownership equally among all 3 kids. Again, the decision feels fair, 1/3 each. But over time, again, governance becomes difficult. Major decisions require agreement. The active child feels constrained. The inactive children feel like they're excluded from the business. Disagreements then tend to emerge around dividends, compensation, reinvestment, and the overall strategic direction of the business. Eventually, the business becomes harder and harder to manage, not because, necessarily the family members dislike each other, but because the ownership structure created competing interests. The business needs a leadership aspect to it. And instead of that, the parents created a committee where no one can get anything done. Those things are not always the same. This brings up another important concept: control. Many succession discussions focus on ownership percentages, but ownership and control are not always identical. A business may have multiple shareholders, but someone still needs the authority to make decisions. They need to be able to hire and fire. They need to be able to negotiate financing and improve investments. They have to have the ability to respond to challenges. Otherwise, the business fails. Without clear leadership, that business is going to struggle. That's the way it works. This is why governance matters so much in family succession planning. Clear shareholder agreements are a must. Defined decision-making authority needs to be inherent there. We need to set up good voting structures, and we need to have a way to resolve any conflicts. These things don't seem exciting, I know, but they often determine whether a family transition is going to succeed or fail. Now, let me give you a third example. Imagine a farming operation where one child has spent their entire career working alongside their parents. They've helped to build the operation. They understand the land, they understand the equipment, and they understand the customers and suppliers inherent to that farming operation. Their siblings, however, have chosen different career paths, which is just fine. One became a teacher, another became an engineer. As retirement approaches, again, the parents face a difficult question. How are we going to treat all 3 of these kids fairly? Initially, equal ownership, again, may be the obvious answer. But equal ownership may create challenges for the child that is expected to continue operating the farm. Eventually, the parents arrive at a different solution. This time, the farming operation transfers primarily to the child that is actively involved in the business. The other children instead receive different estate assets, investments, insurance proceeds, other properties. The outcome may not necessarily be equal in this case, but it is indeed fair. Each child receives value. The farming operation remains viable with the child that can actually operate it. And the family has a better opportunity to preserve both their relationships and the continuity of the business going forward. This illustrates a very important point. Fairness does not always require identical outcomes. Sometimes fairness means recognizing different contributions to that business, different responsibilities that each child has, and different risks and different futures that that child has. One of the biggest mistakes families make in avoiding these conversations entirely. Parents often worry that discussing succession planning will create conflict amongst the family. So what do? They delay. They postpone these difficult decisions, and they hope things will just somehow work themselves out. But unfortunately, like I have seen way too often, uncertainty often creates much more conflict than it does clarity. Family members begin making assumptions, and the expectations around those develop privately and ultimately lead to misunderstandings. The longer those assumptions remain unaddressed, the more difficult that they tend to become to resolve. Successful family transfers are rarely built on assumptions. They are built on upfront communication. We need to have honest conversations. We need to set clear expectations, and we need to put in realistic planning for our family business. Another important reality is that not every child wants that ownership stake. Some want to be involved, some want some sort of economic participation in it, and some may want neither of these things. The only way to ever understand any of these differences is through a discussion with all of your kids. These discussions should happen long before transition ever occurs. The strongest family transitions often begin years in advance. Children gradually will take on responsibility. You can gradually move, the leadership aspect of it and allow the expectations to be clarified in regard to that business. The family then has more time to work through difficult decisions rather than making abrupt decisions. Like many aspects of succession planning, time always creates options, and options create better outcomes for you. So let me leave you with 3 takeaways from today's discussion. Number 1, fair and equal are not always the same thing. Treating family members fairly does not necessarily require an identical ownership outcome at the end of the day. Number 2, ownership and control should be considered separately. A successful business still requires clear leadership and decision-making authority. Lastly, number 3, the strongest family transitions are built on communication. The earlier that you can have these conversations with your children, the more flexibility that your family is going to have to create solutions that work for both the business and your family that is involved. If today's episode made you realize that family succession may be more complicated than simply dividing things equally, our business succession planning ebook is a practical place to start. And hey, it's free. It's designed specifically for you, the business owner that's navigating these difficult decisions. And it's available right now at legacyllp.ca. If this episode was useful, please subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know a business owner struggling with family succession decisions, please feel free to share this episode with them. In the next episode, we will discuss another important succession planning topic: holding companies and corporate structures used in transition. We'll look at why structure matters, flexibility, and some of the important challenges that business owners should understand before transition begins. Thanks again for listening to Legacy, the Business Succession Podcast. If you're building something meaningful, it deserves a thoughtful transition. Thanks again. We'll talk again soon. Take care.